Leon, take us there. Now, you are the education director for the NAACP, yes?
California.
California, okay, California, United States, same thing.
You just gave me a promotion.
So who studies the impact of poverty and segregation on Black and Latino children, particularly in the education space? I want to move towards that. Now, talk to us a little bit about how some of the approaches to deal with some of the issues that relate that, or this, the growth or the seeds of the problematic issues around neighborhoods of color when it comes to education. Talk about that a little bit, and then I'll ask you a few questions.
So first of all, glad to be here. I'm coming from California. You guys forgot to tell me how cold it is here. Wow. It's so rare that you get so many people that are interested in a panel about history. So what I want to really talk about is how inequality has paved the way for privatization and private control, charter schools, and vouchers. But I want to take you back. I want to take you back to after Brown versus Board of Education. There was a white academic in Chicago. His name was Milton Friedman. Now this gentleman talked about how markets should be used in the provision of education, and in that provision, the idea was that private corporations and private individuals should run our school systems. That was the idea. And so there's a lot of conversation about who first uttered the word charter, who first uttered the word voucher. But we know right here in Minnesota in 1991 was the first charter. It's a charter school to recover students. It's a school still open today. In fact, in the 1990s, I came to St. Paul and volunteered in a Hmong charter school right on the river. I can't remember the name of the school. And so there's this long-standing conversation about charter schools. But we have been studying charter schools now for a couple of decades. And there's a lot of research on charter schools, a lot of peer-reviewed research on charter schools. Gary Orfield, Myron's brother, has done research in segregation in charter schools and found that charter schools are about 17% more segregated than the neighborhood public schools that those students leave. Now, the challenge with this is that students, families, they're going from their already segregated neighborhood public schools to even more segregated charter schools. Now, the challenge with that is that these charter schools, the vast majority of charter schools, don't perform better than the neighborhood public schools. Credo's work shows that. We have these conversations. I often have conversations with charter school proponents. I myself was a charter school board member. I was a charter school parent. I was an instructor at the charter school. But as the research has started to come in, I've changed my mind about the role of charter schools, the evolution of charter schools. So last week, or maybe it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I've actually traveled 100,000 miles this year, so I'm a little tired. But I was in New York City a couple weeks ago. The charter school people asked me to come to their symposium, and it's all people who own and operate charter schools. And they made the point that, yes, we understand schools, our charter schools are more segregated. But the reason why they're more segregated is because we've self-determined them to be segregated. We've decided that they'll be segregated, and we're okay with that. It's an extension of the self-determination movement. The second point that they made, and I don't know if you're going to agree with them, I didn't agree with them. They said that there was no research that shows that integration is good for kids. This was the conversation at this charter school summit in New York City. And it was said earlier that this segregation is really the heart of the business plan. And I don't remember who it was here that said that. Maybe it was Dr. Orfield, I'm not sure. But in many ways, we're missing opportunities with charter schools, with magnets even. And the reason why I say that is if you think about Albert Shanker, who really brought the charter school idea to prominence in the late 1980s. The idea was that charter schools would be more community-based, that they would be more democratic, that they would even be run by teachers. That was the original vision of charter schools. But that's not where we've gone. Where we've gone is that school choice has resulted in schools that are even more segregated than the neighborhood public schools that we have. That they perform, on average, worse than the neighborhood public schools that they're nearby. That they have reduced educator quality. There's lots of research that shows that there's higher turnover of charter school students, they're less likely to be certified, and that there's less public transparency and accountability for charter schools, and that varies state to state, but there's less transparency. And I think that dovetails, because there's been very few people that have been willing to stand up to Broad, Gates, Walton Family Foundation. There's been very few people, but there have been civil rights organizations that have. The Journey for Justice, the Movement for Black Lives, and the NAACP have all called for a reassessment of what school choice is actually doing in communities of color across the United States. And so you saw a moratorium voted on by the members of the NAACP last year. They had a lot of conversation. I think it sparked a necessary conversation because we haven't been having conversations about segregation as a result of school choice. We have not been having conversations about transparency and accountability. We have not been having conversations about, most of the Credo studies show that charters actually have a negative impact on Black and brown kids. That was one quick side story, and then I'll get to I'll bring it home, which is that I was in Philadelphia having one of these debates. The reason why it was a little north of Philadelphia, Reading. And the reason why I was there was because the local school district, which is the authorizer of the charter schools, having a disagreement with a charter school because they're poor performing, they're low performing. And so the authorizer said, we're going to close you because you're a low performing charter school. And the charter school said, hell no, we're taking you to court. $500,000 later, they're still battling out in court. Right? And so they wanted to have this community conversation. And so I came to this debate prepared. There was a KIF TFA person there. For those of you that keep up with Ed Reform, you probably know what that means. And so I made the point that the Credo study shows that charters actually have a negative impact on African American and Latino students across the state of Pennsylvania in the Credo study. So he came back, and actually, I'm going to be honest with you, I laid a little trap for him. So he came back and said, well, the Philadelphia study shows that Credo shows that charters are actually good for kids. And I told him, you know what, you need to read down a little farther in that study. Because what that study shows is that charters are actually great for white and Asian kids and have a negative impact on African American and Latino kids. You got to keep reading the study. So I think the challenge is that we've got to make these conversations part of the public discourse. We must talk about the segregative effects of charter schools and of choice. And it's not just charters. Magnets are problematic in many ways too when there's selective enrollment. And I think there's another stand that the NAACP took this year. It didn't get as much press, I think, as the charter resolution last year. But there was a resolution this year, and I believe it has passed the National Board, the chest, yes, that says that our schools are, including and especially charter schools, are not fulfilling the promise of Brown. Thank you.